Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in again. I'm sitting down here in the basement bait shop starting to get a few rods rigged for Sam Rayburn, as well as a lot of the other lakes I'll be going to because they are grass lakes. So I'm rigging up some rods with braided line, and that had me thinking about some questions that I've gotten from you guys out there who wanted me to talk about braided line, when I use it, when you would use it over some of the other lines, and kind of what the differences are amongst braided lines. Because I think a lot of people don't understand that braided line, one company's braided line is not the same as another company's braided line. And a lot of companies offer multiple braided lines because they're built differently and they're supposed to be used for different applications. So that's what I want to talk about today. When you break down lines, they are really a tool. I can't tell you how many times it frustrates me when people are like, you can only use braid, or you can only use braid to fluorocarbon, or you can only use fluorocarbon. Because really, fishing line is a tool. There are lines made for specific applications that will really, really help you excel. If you don't use that line, it will hurt you. If you're frogging and you're throwing a frog in heavy vegetation, if you are not throwing braided line, you are missing a ton of bites. You will lose them. You won't get the hookups. That's how it is. You will dramatically increase the number of fish you land on a frog if you throw a braided line. Now, I also will counter that by saying that if you're fishing some sort of finesse technique, if you're using straight braid, you're probably costing yourself some bites. So there really are different lines made for different applications. And there's so many lines on the market, it's kind of hard to keep up with what's being offered. So for me, guys, I like to throw fluorocarbon the majority of the time if I can get away from it. If I'm casting, generally I'm going to be throwing fluorocarbon. If though I'm using moving baits or fishing heavy grass, that's when I'll start moving towards braided line, and a lot of my flipping applications are braided line if I'm throwing into heavy mats or thick milfoil, that type of stuff. So I will go with straight braided a lot of times. The two braids that I utilize are very different though. I like the brand that I like is the Berkley, and I like the X5 and the X9. And you go, well, what's the difference? Well, the true difference here is the number of strands that these two braids are made with. The X9 is 9 strands of material. The X5 is 5 strands. So they're both, if you've got 40-pound tests, they're both going to be 40-pound tests. But because the X9 is made with 9 strands, they're 9 smaller strands. So when they weave that together, you get a much more circular shape to the line. It's much more tightly woven together with less space between them. Whereas if you use the X5, you get a 5 larger strands that when woven together are not quite as round because you have more gaps between it. It's if you take 5 big strands of rope and weave them together, it'll look more braided. If you take 9 thin strands and weave it together, it'll look less braided because it's tighter together. So that's the biggest difference. And you go, well, why is it important then to use the 9 strand versus the 5 strand? Well, it really comes down to a couple of things. So if I'm throwing the X5, say, so this is what I'm going to use for heavier applications. The reason for that is because the 5 strands are thicker, it's more abrasion resistant. So it's going to hold up better in really heavy cover. So if I rub it on rocks, it's going to be harder to break the 5 than the 9. But I won't always throw it into heavy cover. I don't throw this into wood generally. If I'm flipping and I'm going to be flipping wood all day, I'd rather go with the X9 because it's smoother. And the reason for that is the 5 strand will actually saw into the wood because there's more gap. There's more, it's like, if you took a saw and had bigger teeth on it, you're going to get a deeper cut. than if you took a saw that had much smaller teeth that were spread apart. That's what happens with this. Like you can probably hear, this is the X5. You can hear the sound. If I just pull my hand down it, you'll hear it. You can kind of hear that there's like a zipper sound to it. If I take the X9 and do it, you don't hear that nearly that zipper sound to it because it's not trying to cut into me nearly as much. So if I'm fishing wood, flipping wood, I want to go with the X9 because it's smoother and it doesn't saw into the wood. You know, if I took that X5 and cast a heavy weight over a tree branch and yo-yoed it over that limb, I'm sawing into that limb, which is going to ultimately get me stuck. Or I'm going to cut through the limb if I did it long enough. But it's just one of those things you want to be aware of. But to counter that, so, you know, if I'm fishing rock, I like it because it's strong. I love throwing the X5 if I'm fishing grass. So if I'm, you know, punching mats or flipping into milfoil, or if I'm casting, say, a chatterbait, you know, into grass clumps and I'm ripping it out, the 5-strand is so much better because it literally saws through the stalks of grass. You will cut through the grass amazingly better than you will with a softer, rounder braid like the X9. So it's one of those things that if I'm going to be throwing to grass all day, I really, really like the X5 because it just cuts through it. It makes it that much easier to snap it out of the grass that I'm fishing. The X9 is what I will throw on almost all of my finesse applications. And that's for a couple of reasons. You know, it really is because it's softer and it's limper. So it is more of a finesse approach, but it casts much, much better because of the fact that it is rounder. It goes through the guides better. It cuts through the wind better. It just is a better casting line because it's more circular. It's softer and it's smoother. So that leads to better casting. And if I'm fishing finesse presentations or I'm casting, say if I'm, you know, fishing a buzzbait, and which I'll do on braided lines sometimes, or if I'm fishing a topwater to a short monofilament leader, I like the X9 because it's smoother and it casts really, really well compared to a coarser braid that's made with less strands. So it's one of those things, guys, that you just kind of got to recognize what you've got. You know, when it comes to knot strengths, again, you know, like your X9, your more stranded braids will be a better knot holding strengths. But for me, that's not a huge issue just because generally when you're throwing braid, you've got such a strong braid on anyways that it's not going to lead to a big issue in terms of breaking the knot. I very rarely break a knot with braid. You may have occasionally, you'll probably pull the knot out before you'll actually break it. But that is something to be aware of. It's just one of those things where braided lines are not all made the same. You will find yourself being frustrated at times if you took your less stranded line like an X5 and flip wood all day. You'd be really frustrated with how many times you got stuck. And you'd be really frustrated if you were trying to rip a bait through grass all day and use the X9 compared to the X5. It just does make a difference. And it's one of those things that, again, you know, braided line is an expense because it's not as cheap as other lines, but the great thing with braided line is it holds up so much better. So I'm going to spool up reels with both of these, and my first 5 tournaments this year, almost actually all 6 of the events I'm going to will have grass fishing in them, and it will not be unusual for me to have the same reels I spool up in the beginning of the season still spooled up with the same X5 or the same X9 by the time I get to the last tournament of the year. It's one of those things that braid, you know, does cost you some money, but it holds up so well that you get a lot more life out of it than you will with fluorocarbon or monofilament. So it's worth the investment in my point of view. But guys, it's one of those things you want to know the differences. Not all braid is made the same. I really recommend when you purchase braid, you know, no matter what company it is that you use, you just look at how it's built, what it's made up of, and you'll find that there are specific braids for specific applications. So don't buy the wrong braid for what you want to do. You'll end up not liking the line you bought. Anyways, guys, if you enjoyed the video, if it was helpful, hit that like button and share it on your social media pages if you like. And you can find both these, I believe, at therealshot.com. The link is in my description. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video. Thanks for watching.